Pay attention to this footage. What you're looking at right now was captured by a bystander's camera in the town square, just seconds before a man was killed in front of hundreds of witnesses. See that figure towering over the crowd? That's not a trick of perspective. That's a 12-foot-tall human being. Now look at the man in the suit standing next to him. Watch his body language. He's confident, smiling, completely unaware that in less than 30 seconds, those massive hands you're seeing will crush the life out of him. This footage became the most crucial piece of evidence in one of the most bizarre murder cases in modern history. This is the story of how a medical monster was created and how that monster finally struck back. You know that feeling when you see something so shocking that your brain struggles to process it? For the people of Riverside, Oregon, that moment came on September 17th, 2008. It was supposed to be a celebration, a town festival that would put their small city on the map. Instead, it became the scene of a killing so public, so impossible to look away from, that it would haunt everyone who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. Let me paint you a picture of Riverside in the fall of 2008. Population, about 15,000. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest excitement is usually the county fair or a high school football game. It's nestled in the northwestern part of Oregon, surrounded by timber country and farmland. Quiet, peaceful, safe. Dr. Thomas Whitmore was Riverside's golden boy. 53 years old, successful, respected. He'd built a thriving medical practice over 2 decades, specializing in endocrinology. He lived in the nicest house on Maple Ridge, drove a Mercedes, sat on the town council. His wife, Patricia, taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. They had 2 daughters in college. By every measure, Thomas Whitmore had achieved the American dream. But here's the thing about small towns. Secrets don't stay buried forever, and Thomas Whitmore had been keeping a secret for 21 years. A secret that was about to walk back into his life in the most horrifying way possible. The secret's name was Daniel "the Mountain" Morrison, and on that September morning, Daniel was coming home. The Riverside Autumn Festival had been planned for months. Local businesses set up booths in the town square. Food vendors lined the streets. The mayor had even managed to book some minor celebrities, a washed-up boy band, a few reality TV contestants. But the main attraction, that was Daniel Morrison, billed as the tallest man walking the earth today. Daniel's carnival manager, a guy named Rick Costello, had been promoting the appearance for weeks. Posters everywhere, radio spots. See the giant of the Pacific Northwest, meet Daniel Morrison in person. The whole thing was supposed to be this feel-good story. Local boy makes it big, comes home to share his success. But let me tell you about Daniel Morrison before he became the Mountain, before his body betrayed him and turned him into something people paid money to gawk at. Daniel was born in Riverside in 1980. Normal kid, happy family. His parents, Robert and Ellen Morrison, owned a small hardware store on Main Street. Daniel played Little League, rode his bike around town, went fishing with his dad on weekends. Everything was perfectly ordinary until he turned 7 years old. That's when his parents noticed something wasn't right. Daniel kept complaining of headaches, terrible headaches that made him scream and vomit. His vision was getting blurry, and he was growing. Not normal childhood growing, this was something else, something frightening. Robert and Ellen took Daniel to the only endocrinologist within 100 miles. Dr. Thomas Whitmore. Whitmore ran tests, MRI scans, blood work, and he found it. A pituitary tumor, a benign growth pressing against Daniel's pituitary gland, causing it to overproduce growth hormone. Left untreated, it would cause gigantism. Daniel would just keep growing and growing until his body couldn't handle the strain anymore. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Whitmore told the Morrisons that surgery was too risky, that Daniel's age made him a poor candidate for the procedure, that they should wait and monitor the situation. That was a lie. What the Morrisons didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Thomas Whitmore was in the middle of writing a research paper about gigantism. He'd been fascinated by the condition for years, consumed by the idea of documenting a case from childhood to adulthood. But cases of true gigantism are incredibly rare. The odds of having one walk into your practice in a small Oregon town? Astronomical. So when 7-year-old Daniel Morrison showed up with a pituitary tumor, Thomas Whitmore saw an opportunity, a living, breathing research subject, a way to make his name in medical circles, a way to write the definitive study on human gigantism. All he had to do was nothing. Daniel's parents trusted Dr. Whitmore. Why wouldn't they? He was the expert. He was their neighbor. His kids and their kid played together at the park. So when Whitmore said to wait and monitor, that's what they did. And Daniel kept growing. By age 10, he was 6 feet tall. By 12, he was 7 feet. The headaches continued. His joints ached constantly. Other kids at school started calling him freak and monster. His parents watched helplessly as their son's body spiraled out of control, all while Dr. Whitmore took notes and measurements and photographs, documenting every stage of Daniel's transformation. When Daniel was 13, his father Robert confronted Whitmore, demanded a second opinion, demanded they see a specialist in Portland. But Whitmore convinced him that moving forward with surgery now would be even more dangerous. The tumor had been there too long. Operating could kill Daniel or leave him brain damaged. Another lie. Robert Morrison wanted to get that second opinion anyway, but money was tight. The hardware store wasn't doing well. Medical bills were piling up, and Dr. Whitmore was offering to treat Daniel for reduced rates, as a professional courtesy to the family. Professional courtesy. Those were the words he used while slowly destroying a child's life for his own academic ambition. By the time Daniel turned 16, he was 11 feet tall and weighed close to 700 pounds. Walking was painful. His heart was straining. He'd dropped out of school because the desks didn't fit him, the doorways didn't fit him. Nothing in the world was built for someone his size. Was isolated, depressed, and in constant pain. His parents were desperate. They finally scraped together enough money to take Daniel to a specialist in Portland. And that's when the truth came out. Dr. Sarah Chen at Oregon Health and Science University took one look at Daniel's medical history and was appalled. "This should have been treated years ago," she told Robert and Ellen Morrison. "The surgery was never as risky as Dr. Whitmore claimed. Your son has suffered unnecessarily for 9 years. The rage that Robert Morrison felt in that moment, can you even imagine it? The betrayal, the realization that his son's entire life had been destroyed by someone they trusted, someone who'd smiled at them across church pews, someone who'd shaken his hand and looked him in the eye while lying to his face. But here's the cruelest part. Dr. Chen could remove the tumor now. She could stop Daniel from growing any further, but she couldn't undo what had already been done. Daniel would be a giant for the rest of his life. His body would never be normal. The damage was permanent. The Morrisons wanted to sue. They wanted to press charges. They wanted Thomas Whitmore to pay for what he'd done. But Whitmore was smart. He'd documented everything carefully, always leaving himself room to claim he'd made reasonable medical judgments. His lawyers argued that medicine wasn't an exact science, that treatment decisions involved professional discretion. The case never went anywhere. 2 years later, when Daniel was 18, his parents were killed in a car accident on Highway 101. Black ice, head-on collision, both died instantly. Daniel inherited the hardware store, but what was he supposed to do with it? He could barely fit through the front door. That's when Rick Costello found him. Costello ran a traveling show. Costello's Cabinet of Human Wonders, he called it. Bearded ladies, sword swallowers, contortionists, and human curiosities. He offered Daniel a way to make money, a way to survive. All Daniel had to do was stand on a stage and let people stare at him. So Daniel Morrison became the Mountain. He traveled across the country for 7 years, living out of custom-made trailers, performing in county fairs and carnival sideshows. People paid $10 to stand next to him for photos, to gawk, to point, to whisper to their kids, "Look at the giant!" And through all of it, through every humiliating moment, Daniel never forgot the man who'd made him this way. Now here's what made the morning of September 17, 2008 even more twisted. Thomas Whitmore had spent the last decade building a reputation as an expert on gigantism. He'd published that research paper, the one based on Daniel's case, though he'd used a fake name and changed identifying details. He'd given lectures, written articles, become a minor celebrity in endocrinology circles. When he heard that Daniel Morrison was coming back to Riverside for the festival, Whitmore saw it as a golden opportunity. A reunion, a photo op. He even pulled strings with the festival organizers to make sure he'd be part of the official welcome ceremony. Did he really think Daniel would just forgive him? Or did he genuinely not understand what he'd done? Maybe after all those years, Whitmore had convinced himself that his medical decisions had been sound, that Daniel's gigantism wasn't his fault. Whatever he thought, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. The crowd in Riverside's town square that morning numbered close to 2,000 people, families with kids, teenagers with cameras, local news crews. Everyone wanted to see the giant. The atmosphere was festive, excited. There was a stage set up, microphones, the whole production. Daniel arrived at 10 a.m. in a custom tour bus. When he stepped out, the crowd went silent for a moment, because seeing him in person wasn't like seeing him in photos or videos. The sheer scale of a 12-foot-tall human being is something your brain has to work to process. Children hid behind their parents. Some people gasped. Others started taking pictures immediately. Daniel was used to this reaction. He'd lived with it for years. He walked slowly toward the stage, each step deliberate, his face expressionless. His manager Rick was beside him, handling the crowd, playing up the spectacle. Mayor Christopher Hayes gave a speech about Riverside's famous son, about how proud the town was, about how Daniel Morrison represented the triumph of the human spirit. It was the kind of empty political nonsense that mayors specialize in, and Daniel stood there through all of it, silent and still. Then Thomas Whitmore stepped forward. Several witnesses later said they saw Daniel's expression change the moment he spotted Whitmore in the crowd. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. One witness, a woman named Jennifer Hastings, said she saw pure hatred in Daniel's eyes, but Whitmore either didn't notice or didn't care. He had this big smile on his face as he approached the stage. He was wearing an expensive suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. In his hand, he carried a framed certificate, some kind of honorary recognition from the medical community that he wanted to present to Daniel as a gesture of goodwill. Can you believe that? A gesture of goodwill. Mayor Hayes introduced Whitmore as Daniel's longtime physician and friend. Those words, longtime physician and friend. Daniel's face went completely blank when he heard them. Whitmore climbed the stage steps. The crowd was watching, cameras were rolling, news reporters were taking notes. This was supposed to be the heartwarming moment of the whole festival. Whitmore approached Daniel with his hand extended for a handshake, still smiling that politician's smile, and then he leaned in close enough that only Daniel could hear what he said next. 3 witnesses who were near the stage reported seeing Whitmore's lips move. They couldn't hear the actual words, but they saw the moment Daniel's expression changed from blank to something else entirely. Something terrifying. What did Whitmore say? We know from the trial testimony. We know because Daniel told the police later. Whitmore had whispered, "You should thank me. I made you famous." That's what he said. After 21 years of stolen childhood, stolen normalcy, stolen life, Thomas Whitmore thought Daniel should thank him. What happened next took less than 5 seconds, but those 5 seconds are burned into the memory of everyone who witnessed them. Daniel's right hand shot out and grabbed Whitmore by the front of his suit jacket. Before anyone could react, before anyone could even process what was happening, Daniel lifted Thomas Whitmore off the ground like he weighed nothing, because to Daniel, he didn't weigh much. Whitmore was 5'9" and 170 pounds. Daniel was 12 feet tall and weighed over 800 pounds. Someone in the crowd screamed. Then everyone was screaming. Daniel pulled Whitmore toward his chest in what looked almost like an embrace. But it wasn't an embrace. It was a bear hug. Daniel squeezed. Witnesses heard a sound like tree branches breaking. That was Whitmore's ribs. The mayor tried to intervene. Rick Costello tried to pull Daniel away, but it was like trying to move a mountain. That's not a metaphor. Daniel was literally immovable to normal-sized people. By the time the first police officer reached the stage, maybe 10 seconds had passed, maybe 15. Thomas Whitmore's face had turned purple. Blood was coming from his mouth. His chest had collapsed inward. Daniel finally let him go. Whitmore's body crumpled to the stage floor. Someone in the crowd was recording on a phone. Someone else fainted. Parents were covering their children's eyes, but it was too late. They'd all seen it. Officer Marcus Webb was the first cop on scene. He drew his weapon, but what was he supposed to do? Shoot a man who'd just been standing there? Daniel hadn't run, hadn't tried to escape. He just stood there over Whitmore's body, staring down at him. He deserved it, Daniel said. His voice was quiet, but in the shocked silence, everyone heard him. He deserved worse. Paramedics rushed to Whitmore, but there was nothing to be done. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death, massive internal injuries, crushed chest cavity, ruptured organs. His sternum had been driven back into his heart. Police tried to handcuff Daniel, but they didn't have handcuffs that would fit around his wrists. They didn't have a police car that he could fit in. They didn't have a jail cell designed for someone his size. The entire infrastructure of law enforcement was built for people 5 to 6 feet tall. In the end, they had to call the fire department. They used industrial chains to secure Daniel's wrists and ankles, not because they thought he'd resist, but because protocol demanded it. He didn't resist. He didn't say anything else. He just let them do whatever they needed to do. The crowd was in chaos. People were crying, throwing up, trying to leave, but packed in too tight to move quickly. News crews were scrambling to get footage. Some thought they'd witnessed a tragic accident. Others knew immediately they'd just watched a murder. Within an hour, the story was national news. Giant kills doctor in public square. The videos started circulating online. People couldn't look away. It was horrifying and fascinating in equal measure, the kind of story that dominates news cycles for weeks. Patricia Whitmore, Thomas's wife, was at home when she got the call. Can you imagine that phone call? Mrs. Whitmore, there's been an incident at the festival. Your husband is dead. She collapsed in her kitchen. Neighbors heard her screaming. The Whitmore daughters, Ashley and Nicole, were both at their respective colleges, one at University of Oregon, one at Portland State. They found out about their father's death from social media before anyone official could contact them. They saw the videos. They watched their father die on their phone screens. For Patricia and her daughters, Thomas Whitmore was a loving husband and father. Whatever he'd done to Daniel Morrison, whatever mistakes he'd made professionally, at home he'd been good to them. Now they had to process not just his death, but the public, violent nature of it. The fact that thousands of people had watched it happen. The fact that it was all over the internet. Meanwhile, Daniel Morrison was transported to Riverside County Jail, where they had to empty an entire wing just to house him. They brought in a custom-made bed from a specialty furniture company. They had to remove a door frame to get him into the cell. And through all of it, Daniel was cooperative, calm, almost serene. The investigation into Thomas Whitmore's death should have been straightforward. 2,000 witnesses, multiple video recordings, open and shut case of murder, right? But Detective Lisa Hernandez, the lead investigator, knew there was more to this story. Because people don't just kill other people in front of crowds for no reason. There's always a reason. And in this case, the reason turned out to be even darker than anyone initially suspected. Hernandez started by interviewing Daniel. He was sitting in his oversized cell, and she was struck by how articulate he was, how intelligent. This wasn't some mindless killer. This was a man who'd been planning something for a very long time. I've been waiting 21 years for this, Daniel told her. I've imagined it 1,000 different ways. But when I saw him standing there, smiling at me, pretending he was my friend, I just couldn't let him keep lying. Daniel told Hernandez everything. About his childhood, about Dr. Whitmore's deliberate decision not to treat his tumor, about the years of pain and isolation, about his parents' deaths and the lawsuit that never went anywhere. But Detective Hernandez needed more than just Daniel's word. She needed proof. So she started digging into Thomas Whitmore's history. What she found was damning. In Whitmore's home office, Hernandez discovered an entire filing cabinet dedicated to Daniel Morrison. Medical records, photographs, measurement charts dating back to 1987. There were journals filled with observations about Daniel's growth patterns, his psychological state, his family's reactions. And then she found the draft manuscript. Whitmore had been working on a book. The Giant Within, a clinical study of pediatric gigantism. The entire thing was based on Daniel's case. There were before and after photos, detailed descriptions of Daniel's physical transformation. Whitmore had even included sections about the fascinating psychological adaptations Daniel had made to his condition. Fascinating. That's the word Whitmore used to describe a child's suffering. But here's what really broke the case wide open. Hernandez found Whitmore's personal correspondence with other doctors, emails, letters. In them, Whitmore explicitly discussed his decision to delay Daniel's surgery. In one particularly chilling email to a colleague dated June 1992, Whitmore wrote, "The Morrison case presents a unique opportunity to observe untreated gigantism from onset through adolescence. Such cases are rare enough that I feel compelled to document it fully before intervening." He knew. He knew he was letting a child suffer for his own research purposes, and he'd put it in writing. Hernandez brought this evidence to the district attorney Sandra Mills. Mills had been ready to charge Daniel with first-degree murder. Maximum sentence. But after seeing Whitmore's files, after understanding what had been done to Daniel, she hesitated. This is where the case got legally complicated. Because yes, Daniel Morrison had absolutely killed Thomas Whitmore. There was no question about that. But the circumstances, the years of medical abuse, the deliberate infliction of a debilitating condition, the psychological trauma, all of that complicated the narrative of who was the real villain. Mills convened a grand jury. She presented all the evidence, the videos of the killing, the witness testimonies, and the documentation of Whitmore's medical abuse. The grand jury returned an indictment, but not for murder. They charged Daniel with voluntary manslaughter. The trial began on March 3, 2009. The courthouse had to be modified to accommodate Daniel. They removed several rows of seating to make room for a custom-built defendant's chair. The visual of it, this giant sitting in a courtroom designed for normal-sized people, was surreal. The prosecution, led by Mills herself, argued that regardless of Whitmore's past actions, Daniel had committed a violent public killing, that there were legal channels for justice, that taking a life in revenge was still murder, no matter how justified the anger. The defense attorney, a woman named Rebecca Torres, argued something different. She painted a picture of a man who'd been systematically destroyed by someone in a position of trust. She brought in medical experts who testified about the psychological effects of Whitmore's abuse. She introduced the concept of cumulative provocation, the idea that Daniel's actions weren't a spontaneous reaction but the inevitable result of decades of trauma. And then there was the footage. Remember that bystander video from the pre-intro, the one filmed right before the killing? Torres had it forensically analyzed, enhanced, and what the analysis showed was fascinating and heartbreaking. If you watched Daniel's face in the moments before Whitmore approached him, you could see him trying to maintain control. His jaw was clenched, his breathing was rapid. When Whitmore started speaking, Daniel closed his eyes for several seconds like he was trying to calm himself. He didn't want to do it. Not really. He'd lived with the rage for 21 years, but he'd never acted on it. He'd found ways to cope, to survive, to keep going. But when Whitmore said, "You should thank me. I made you famous," that's when something broke. Torres played that footage in court over and over. She had a lip-reading expert analyze Whitmore's words and confirm them. She made sure the jury understood that this wasn't premeditated murder. This was a man pushed beyond his breaking point by the very person who'd spent decades pushing him. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Patricia Whitmore testified about her husband's character, about the father and husband they'd lost. The Whitmore daughters both testified, crying on the stand, talking about how their lives had been shattered. Daniel listened to all of it. Several jurors later said they'd never forget the expression on his face when Ashley Whitmore, Thomas's younger daughter, described finding out about her father's death on Twitter. Daniel looked destroyed. Whatever satisfaction he'd gotten from killing Whitmore, it was gone now. Now he just looked like what he was, a broken man who'd broken someone else. On April 17, 2009, the jury reached a verdict after 4 days of deliberation. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not guilty of murder. It was a compromise verdict, and it satisfied no one. Daniel Morrison was sentenced to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8. The judge, Margaret Keating, delivered a 20-minute statement explaining her sentence. She acknowledged Whitmore's medical abuse. She acknowledged Daniel's suffering, but she also said that nothing, no amount of past trauma, justified taking another person's life in such a brutal public manner. "Two wrongs don't make a right," Judge Keating said. Dr. Whitmore's actions were deplorable and likely criminal, but the proper response was through the legal system, not through violence. The court recognizes the profound injustice done to Mr. Morrison, but we cannot condone his response to that injustice. The Oregon Department of Corrections had to retrofit an entire section of the state penitentiary to house Daniel. It cost taxpayers over $2 million. He was kept in isolation, not as punishment, but because there simply wasn't anywhere else that could accommodate him. Patricia Whitmore never spoke publicly about her husband's actions regarding Daniel. She moved to California to be closer to her daughters. The family sold their house in Riverside at a loss and tried to rebuild their lives away from the place where everything fell apart. The medical community was shaken by the revelations about Whitmore's conduct. Oregon Health and Science University, where he'd done his residency, launched an investigation into his research practices. They found several other questionable cases, though none as egregious as Daniel's. Whitmore's medical license was posthumously revoked, and new protocols were implemented for medical research involving children. Daniel Morrison is currently serving his sentence at Oregon State Penitentiary. He's been a model prisoner. He works in the prison library, one of the few spaces that had high enough ceilings for him. He's earned his GED and is working on a college degree through correspondence courses. He's up for parole in 2017. In 2011, Daniel gave a single interview to journalist Maria Santos. He talked about the day he killed Thomas Whitmore. "I don't regret that he's dead," Daniel said. "I can't regret that. But I regret the way it happened. I regret that his daughters had to see it. I regret that children in that crowd had to witness it. If I could go back, I'd find a different way. But I can't go back." He also said something else that stayed with Santos. "Dr. Whitmore spent my entire childhood turning me into a monster. And then, I proved him right." Daniel Morrison was charged with voluntary manslaughter in the death of Dr. Thomas Whitmore. He was found guilty and sentenced to 12 years imprisonment with eligibility for parole after 8 years. The original charge of first-degree murder was not pursued after evidence of medical abuse was presented to the grand jury. This case changed how we think about medical ethics, about the abuse of power in doctor-patient relationships, and about the long-term consequences of systematic cruelty. Daniel Morrison's story is a tragedy without winners. A young boy was destroyed by someone who was supposed to heal him, and when that boy finally fought back as a man, another family was destroyed in turn. For Daniel Morrison, who should have had a normal life, a normal body, a normal chance at happiness, we remember what was stolen from you, and we acknowledge that justice, when it finally came far too late to matter.